Elvis was reviewing demo tapes in his Graceland recording room when he heard a voice that made him drop everything. But this wasn't just any singer. This was someone who couldn't speak. It was February 1973, and Elvis was going through one of the most difficult periods of his life. His divorce from Priscilla was becoming final. His health was deteriorating. The prescription medications were starting to control him instead of the other way around. And worst of all, he felt disconnected from music, the one thing that had always saved him. His producer, Felton Jarvis, had been sending him boxes of demo tapes from aspiring artists, hoping something would spark Elvis's interest, would remind him why he loved making music in the first place. Elvis had listened to hundreds of tapes that week. Most of them were competent but forgettable. People trying to sound like other people, copying styles that were already successful. Nothing original, nothing that touched him. Then he put in a cassette tape labeled simply, Sarah, age 14. The moment the music started, Elvis froze. It wasn't the singing that stopped him, although the voice was hauntingly beautiful. It was something else, something he couldn't quite identify at first. The voice had a quality he'd never heard before, a fragility, a vulnerability, but also a strength that seemed to come from somewhere deep and hard-won. The girl was singing Amazing Grace, but she was doing something unusual with the melody. The notes would hold longer than expected, the phrasing was unconventional, and there were small imperfections that somehow made it more powerful, not less. Elvis listened to the entire song in silence. Then, he immediately played it again, and again. On the fourth listen, he noticed something written in small handwriting on the tape's label that he'd missed before. Sarah Jenkins, born deaf, learned to sing by feeling vibrations. Elvis's hands started shaking. Elvis immediately called Felton Jarvis. "Who sent this tape?" Felton's voice came through the phone, slightly confused. "Which one? I sent you about 50 this week." "The girl, Sarah, the one who's deaf. Who is she? Where did this come from?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Oh, that one. A woman from Nashville sent it. The girl's aunt, I think. She wanted you to hear it, but she said not to expect anything. She just thought you'd appreciate it as an artist." "Appreciate it?" Elvis's voice cracked with emotion. "Felton, this is the most honest thing I've heard in 10 years. I need to meet her. Can you find her?" "Elvis, I don't think that's what they were asking for. They just wanted you to hear—" "I don't care what they were asking for," Elvis interrupted. "That girl has something special, and I need to understand it. Please, Felton, find her." 3 days later, Sarah Jenkins and her Aunt Martha drove from Nashville to Graceland. Sarah had no idea why they were going. Her aunt had told her they were taking a trip to Memphis to see some sights, maybe visit Sun's studio where Elvis had recorded his first songs. Sarah was 14 years old, born profoundly deaf due to complications during birth. She'd never heard a single sound in her entire life. Not her mother's voice, not a bird singing, not music playing on the radio. But Sarah could feel vibrations. When she was 8 years old, her Aunt Martha had been playing an old Elvis record, Love Me Tender, on a record player. Sarah had walked over and placed her hands on the speaker. She felt the vibrations traveling through her fingers, up her arms, into her chest. It was the first time Sarah understood what music was. From that moment on, Sarah became obsessed with feeling music. She would place her hands on speakers, on pianos, on guitar bodies. She learned to distinguish different instruments by their vibrations. A bass felt different from a guitar. A voice felt different from both. And slowly, impossibly, Sarah learned to sing. She couldn't hear herself, so she had to rely entirely on feeling. She would place one hand on her throat and one hand on her chest, feeling the vibrations she was creating, trying to match them to the vibrations she felt from recordings. It took her 6 years to learn what most people learned in 6 months. But what she created was unlike anything anyone had heard before. Because Sarah wasn't copying what she heard. She was creating what she felt. When Martha pulled up to the gates of Graceland, Sarah still had no idea why they were really there. She thought they were just going to look at Elvis's house from the outside, like thousands of other tourists did. Then the gates opened, and a security guard waved them through. Sarah looked at her aunt with confusion and signed, "What's happening?" Martha, tears already forming in her eyes, signed back, "Elvis wants to meet you." Elvis met them at the front door of Graceland himself. No entourage, no handlers, just Elvis in a casual shirt and slacks, looking nervous. When he saw Sarah, he immediately knelt down to be at her eye level. He'd learned a few basic signs in preparation for this meeting, and he signed clumsily, "Hello, Sarah. Thank you for coming." Sarah's eyes went wide. Elvis Presley knew her name. Elvis Presley had learned sign language for her. She signed back more fluently, "You're Elvis." Elvis smiled and stood up, gesturing for them to come inside. He led them to his music room, where his piano sat near a large window overlooking the grounds. Through Martha's interpretation and some basic signing, Elvis explained why he'd asked them to come. "Sarah," he said, making sure she could see his lips as Martha signed his words, "I listened to your tape, not once, not twice, but probably 50 times over the last 3 days. And I need to tell you something. In 30 years of making music, I've never heard anything as pure and honest as what you created." Sarah looked confused. She signed to her aunt, who translated, "But I can't hear. How can my music be good if I can't even hear it?" Elvis's response surprised everyone in the room. "That's exactly why it's so good. You're not trying to sound like anyone else because you've never heard anyone else. You're not copying or imitating. You're creating something completely original because you have to feel it instead of hear it." Elvis sat down at his piano. "Can I show you something?" He began playing "Can't Help Falling in Love," one of his most famous songs. But he invited Sarah to come stand next to the piano and place her hands on it while he played. Sarah put both hands flat on the piano's surface. As Elvis played and sang, she felt every note, every vibration, every subtle change in tone and emotion. Tears started streaming down her face. When Elvis finished, Sarah signed something to her aunt. Martha's voice shook as she translated. "She says that's the most beautiful thing she's ever felt in her entire life. She says she can feel your sadness in the music, your loneliness, your hope. She says you put your whole heart into the vibrations." Elvis was crying now too. "Sarah, that's what music is supposed to be. It's not about hitting perfect notes or sounding like what's popular. It's about putting your truth into the vibrations so that other people can feel it. You already understand that better than most professional musicians I know." Then Elvis did something unprecedented. He asked Sarah if she would sing for him in person. Sarah was terrified. She'd never sung in front of anyone except her aunt. She couldn't hear herself. She didn't know if she was any good. The only reason that tape existed was because her aunt had recorded her secretly one day when she was practicing alone. But this was Elvis Presley asking. So she agreed. Elvis asked her what song she wanted to sing. Through Martha, Sarah said, "Amazing Grace. It's the first song I learned to feel all the way through." Elvis sat at his piano and began playing the accompaniment. Sarah placed one hand on the piano and one hand on her throat, using the vibrations to guide her. When she started singing, everyone in the room fell completely silent. Her voice was imperfect by conventional standards. Some notes wavered. The timing was unconventional. But there was something so raw, so genuine, so filled with emotion that it transcended technique. She was singing about grace, about being lost and then found, and every word felt like she'd lived it. Because in a way, she had. She'd been lost in a silent world, and music had found her. When she finished, Elvis was sobbing. His piano playing had faltered several times because he couldn't see the keys through his tears. "Sarah," he said, making sure she could see his lips, "that was perfect. Not technically perfect. Perfectly honest, perfectly real. That's what music should be." Elvis spent the entire afternoon with Sarah. He showed her his recording studio in the basement of Graceland. He let her feel the vibrations from different instruments. He taught her some basic music theory using vibration and feeling instead of sound. But most importantly, he told her something that changed her life. Sarah, I've been making music for 20 years, and somewhere along the way, I forgot why I started. I forgot that music isn't about being perfect or popular or even being heard. It's about being honest. It's about creating something true. He paused, making sure she could read his lips clearly. You reminded me of that. You saved something in me that I thought was dying. Before Sarah left, Elvis made her a promise. I want to record a song with you, a real recording in a real studio. Will you do that? Sarah signed back, but I'm deaf. I can't be a real singer. Elvis's response was immediate and firm. You're more of a real singer than most people I know. Being deaf doesn't stop you from creating music. It just means you understand it differently. And honestly, better. Over the next 3 months, Elvis worked with Sarah on a recording of Amazing Grace. They did it in a special way. The studio engineers set up additional speakers on the floor and walls so Sarah could feel the music more intensely. Elvis sang harmony with her, and they created something unlike anything in his catalog. The recording was never released commercially. Elvis kept it private, personal, but he played it for friends and fellow musicians, and everyone who heard it was moved to tears. That recording with that little deaf girl, said J.D. Sumner, Elvis's longtime gospel singer friend, was the most spiritual thing Elvis ever did. You could hear his heart breaking open. You could hear him remembering why he loved music in the first place. Sarah Jenkins continued singing, though she never pursued it professionally. She became a teacher for deaf children, using music and vibration as therapy tools to help kids like her connect with the world in a different way. The Sarah method, as it came to be known, is now used in schools for the deaf across America. It teaches deaf children that they can experience music through vibration and that they can create music even if they can't hear it. Elvis and Sarah stayed in touch through letters and occasional visits until Elvis's death in 1977. He always referred to her in private as the girl who reminded me what music really is. In one of his final interviews before he died, Elvis was asked what his favorite recording was. He surprised everyone by not mentioning any of his hits. There's a recording I made with a 14-year-old deaf girl singing Amazing Grace, Elvis said. Nobody's ever heard it except a few friends, but that's my favorite thing I've ever done. Because it wasn't about me or my career or hits. It was about two people creating something honest together. That's what music is supposed to be. After Elvis died, Sarah was invited to sing at a private memorial service at Graceland. She sang Amazing Grace the same way she'd sung it with Elvis, placing her hand on a piano while someone played accompaniment. Everyone there said it was the most moving tribute of all, not because it was technically perfect, but because it was perfectly honest. Elvis taught me that being different isn't a disability, Sarah said years later in an interview conducted in sign language. He taught me that the way I experience music, through feeling instead of hearing, isn't less valid. It's just different. And sometimes different is exactly what the world needs. Today, the recording of Elvis and Sarah singing Amazing Grace is preserved in the Graceland archives. It's not available to the public, but occasionally, very occasionally, it's played for visitors who ask about Elvis's most meaningful musical moment. Those who've heard it say it's impossible to listen to without crying, not because of the vocal perfection, but because of the pure, unfiltered honesty between a dying superstar trying to remember why he loved music and a deaf child teaching him that music isn't something you hear. It's something you feel. The story of Elvis and Sarah Jenkins reminds us that the most important things in life transcend our limitations. Sarah couldn't hear, but she understood music more deeply than most people with perfect hearing. Elvis was losing his way, but a 14-year-old girl showed him the path back to what mattered. Sometimes the greatest gifts come from the most unexpected places. Sometimes the people we think we're helping are actually saving us. And sometimes the most powerful music isn't the music that sounds perfect. It's the music that feels true. Elvis spent his life trying to be perfect for his fans, his producers, his critics. But in one afternoon with a deaf girl who'd learned to sing by feeling vibrations, he remembered something essential. Perfection isn't the goal. Truth is. And truth doesn't need perfect pitch or flawless technique. It just needs an honest heart and the courage to share it with the world, even when you can't hear yourself, even when you're afraid, even when the whole world tells you that you're not enough. Sarah Jenkins proved that being deaf doesn't stop you from creating beautiful music. And Elvis Presley proved that even the king of rock and roll needed to be reminded every once in a while what his crown was really for. Not to elevate himself above others, but to lift up the voices that the world wasn't listening to. If this story of connection, honesty, and the true meaning of music moved you, make sure to subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear that their differences make them special, not limited. What does music mean to you beyond just sound? Let us know in the comments and hit that notification bell for more incredible true stories about the moments that remind us what really matters.